We're going to debate net zero and whether it has a future or indeed it may be a whole load of hot air. And I'm joined by Rupert Read now, who's the co-director of the Climate Majority Project and a former Extinction Rebellion spokesman. And I'm also joined by Andy Mayer, who's an energy analyst from the Institute of Economic Affairs. Thank you for joining me this evening, chaps. Lovely to see you both. Now, the reason we're talking about this has been a number of news stories which I think have sort of suggested that the future for net zero might be in a degree of jeopardy. And we know there's been a political row about it. But, for instance, we've heard from the National Grid saying it's going to cost $60 billion to reach net zero, to decarbonise the grid, which is obviously a significant amount of money. We've also heard from a solar company called Longi, which has slashed 30% of staff because there's now a glut of solar panels. We've also heard from the National Audit Office to suggest that 27 times more gas boilers than heat pumps have been sold in 2022. Obviously, the government wanted us all to embrace heat pumps, and we haven't. And therefore, let's put it to you first of all, Rupert, isn't it the case that actually net zero is running out of steam, not least because we read this week, and isn't this an achievement for Britain, that carbon emissions have fallen to the lowest levels since 1879? So we've done our bit, haven't we? We don't need to set these arbitrary targets that just make the poor poorer.
We haven't done our bit. Look, let's remind ourselves why net zero matters. We hear this phrase a lot, net zero, net zero. Why does it matter? It matters because as long as it takes for us to get to reach net zero, during all that time, the problem is being made worse, i.e. the climate crisis is being made worse. The more we pump into the atmosphere, the worse it will get every single year forever until we reach net zero. But we're pumping less into the atmosphere,
apparently, because our carbon emissions are now to the lowest level since 1879.
Yeah, but actually they're not when you do the accounting properly. We've outsourced a lot of carbon emissions to other countries, and also the shipping and the air emissions are not counted properly. So that's really a sort of fake stat. We've got to get to net zero if we want to have a future in which we're not making the problem that our children and our grandchildren are going to inherit worse forever. But then there's the other side of the coin as well, which is that if we do it in the right way, we can make our lives better and more comfortable. And isn't that what we all want?
Well, better and
more comfortable lives for our children. Well, can I just explain why? Very briefly.
We haven't got that much time. Let's bring Andy into the conversation. You can come back to him, Rupert.
Yeah, but you must come back to me on that.
But are we doing it in the right way? Because I'm sure the IEA and others are very concerned that this is happening too quickly, that it's threatening working people with huge
Camilla, it's happening too slowly. I already explained that very clearly.
Rupert, we get your point, but that doesn't mean we all agree with it. Let's see what Andy's got to say.
So Rupert's not entirely wrong. It is the case that if we did absolutely nothing, global temperatures would keep rising until such a point that we couldn't adapt to the level at which they were. But in reality, nothing is not what happens. Everybody is trying to find solutions to something better than the fossil fuel economy. And the principal argument from places like the IEA and other free market environmentalists is that the state intervening is not the best way of doing it. They actively make things worse. So if you take one of the examples you used, heat pumps. Heat pumps are a perfectly fine technology. They work to heat homes across large parts of Scandinavia. They can work in cold climes. They could work here, but we've got the wrong type of housing stock. So in reality, you would have to improve vast amounts of homes across the entire country to make heat pumps a viable alternative to gas boilers. Now, the government is trying to encourage people to buy them, but the public are turning around saying even with £7,500 subsidies on each one, they're saying no. So this is one of those examples where the state tries to plan a particular outcome, and what happens in reality is very expensive and very ineffective.
Andy makes a good point, doesn't he? I mean, forcing us into electric vehicles but not having enough charging points. I spoke to the Transport Secretary, Mark Harper, at the weekend.
He couldn't
tell us how many... Hang on a minute, how many charging points there are in the UK. But heat pumps, have you got one?
Yes, I've got one.
Right. Why don't we all want one then?
Well, it would be much easier for us all to have one if we were given proper advice. Hang on. I'll tell you why I hesitated to buy a heat pump. It's because I wasn't sure it was going to be a good investment. I wasn't sure I was going to get good workmanship, etc. That's what needs to be put in place. Help for people to make the decision to get air pumps easier. And that isn't there in place. So far from the government doing too much, the government's doing too little. And it's the exact same with business.
So Andy,
I've answered your question. I want to now come back to the business question, which you asked Andy about. The You say that the government is intervening too much and we should just let the market sort net zero. Then explain to me this, Andy, riddle me this. How come 82% of business people say the government needs to do more to regulate for net zero and you can't leave it all to the market? That's a YouGov poll. Riddle me that.
Well, I think you've displayed a classic delusion on the left, which is the idea...
I'm not on the left. Try again.
Which is the idea that there is something distinct between business and government. The whole problem with net zero is collusion between the two. So in the case of the heat pump manufacturers, what is happening is they are rent-seeking and lobbying to rent-seek at our expense, such that the grant that you used to install your heat pump was paid for people demonstrably poorer than you, in order that you might heat your home in a slightly different way. And frankly,
lecture me about poverty when your backers are multimillionaires, please.
Oh well,
all sorts of backers.
If you're not very briefly, if you're not on the left, where are you? Are you on the right?
No, I'm neither. The Climate Majority Project is here for everybody who wants to take action on the climate.
I love this debate. Thank you very much, chaps. I'm afraid we've got to draw it to a close because obviously there are events going on in the Houses of Parliament.